Unit 28. Gateway. Internalization depends on supports for autonomy. Contexts that use controlling strategies, such as salient rewards and punishments or evaluative self-esteem hooking pressures, are least likely to lead people to value activities as their own. This is not to say that controls don't work to produce behavior. Decades of operant psychology prove that they can. It is rather that the more salient the external control over a person's behavior, the more the person is likely to be merely externally regulated or introjected in his or her actions. Consequently, the person does not develop a value or investment in the behaviors, but instead remains dependent on external controls. Thus, parents who reward, force, or cajole their child to do homework are more likely to have a child who does so only when rewarded, cajoled, or forced. The salience of external controls undermines the acquisition of self-responsibility. Alternatively, parents who supply reasons, show an emotional understanding of difficulties overcoming problems, and use a minimum of external incentives, are more likely to cultivate a sense of willingness and value for work in their child. Exercises. Number 1. By focusing on just one aspect of our lives, we are failing to consider all the other things that contribute to happiness. For example, if you ask students 2 questions, how happy are you with your life in general, followed by, how many dates did you have last month? There is absolutely no relationship between the answers. However, if you reverse the order of the questions and start with the dating question, this produces a strong relationship. Those with more dates rate themselves as happier with their lives compared with those who went on fewer dates. By focusing and anchoring the respondent to a measure of popularity, you are influencing their subsequent evaluation of well-being. The same effect can be found when attention is first called to an attendant's marriage or their health. The reason happiness levels change is that people do not know how happy they are in general, and so they become susceptible to the focusing of attention on different aspects of their life. When people consider the impact of any single factor on their happiness, they are inclined to exaggerate its importance. Number 2. Women and men differ in whether they describe themselves as empathic. If you have empathy, you identify with others and imagine what it must be like to walk in their shoes. You celebrate with those who are happy and cry with those who cry. Physiological measures of empathy, such as heart rate while seeing another's distress, reveal a much smaller gender gap than is found in self-reports and surveys. Nevertheless, females are more likely to express empathy, to cry and to report distress when observing someone in distress. Anne Kring and Albert Gordon observed this gender difference in videotapes of men and women students watching film clips that were sad, children with a dying parent, happy, slapstick comedy, or frightening, a man nearly falling off of a tall building. Their findings showed that the women reacted more visibly to each film type. Women also tend to experience emotional events more deeply, with more brain activation in areas sensitive to emotion, and to remember the scenes better 3 weeks later. Number 3. Laughing and smiling are not just signals for others that we are like them. They are strong emotional drives that bind us together as a social species. They are just some of the mechanisms that begin to integrate the individual into a group. When my infant daughter burst into laughter, she was demonstrating one of the most powerful primitive needs to make contact. Without the ability to laugh and smile, we would be isolated individuals. We use laughter to lubricate awkward social interactions as a way of signaling that we are easygoing, not aggressive, and potentially someone worth investing time and effort in. In short, we use laughter to generate our reflected self, because our sense of self depends on what others think of us. And being funny is considered by many in our culture as an important measure of who we are. It is one of the reasons that most of us think we have a better than average sense of humor, although statistically that cannot be true. Very few people would readily admit that they do not have a sense of humor.